March 17, 1963. The lobby of the Hotel Theresa, Harlem, New York. A trusted man stands behind Bumpy Johnson. His hand is in his coat. $50,000 already in his account. The most powerful gangster in Harlem doesn't see it coming. The gun is raised, point-blank range. The trigger is pulled. Click. Nothing. In that frozen second, everything changes. Not just for Bumpy, not just for the would-be assassin, but for every man, woman, and child who lived under Bumpy's protection in Harlem. What happened next became legend. What they discovered became a message that echoed through the underworld for decades. Here's the story. Harlem in 1963 was a contradiction. On the surface, it pulsed with life. Jazz clubs spilled music onto Lenox Avenue. The Apollo Theater marquee glowed like a promise. Churches stood on every third corner, their bells calling the faithful. But underneath that rhythm, underneath that soul, there was another Harlem, a Harlem of shadows and whispers. Harlem controlled by one man, Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson. The name alone carried weight. When Bumpy walked down 125th Street, conversation stopped. Hats came off. Eyes dropped. Not out of fear alone, though fear was part of it. Out of respect. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was Harlem's protector. It's Robin Hood in a custom suit and a fedora tilted just so. The Hotel Theresa stood at the corner of 125th and 7th Avenue. The Waldorf of Harlem, they called it. Fidel Castro stayed there in 1960. Malcolm X held meetings in its rooms. And Bumpy, he conducted business in the lobby like it was his office, because it was. March 1963, Bumpy was 56 years old. He'd survived 4 decades in a business where most men didn't make it 4 years. He'd done time in Alcatraz. He'd fought the Italians for control of the numbers racket. He'd gone to war with Dutch Schultz and lived to tell about it. His legend was carved in the concrete of Harlem, but legends make enemies. The bigger your shadow, the more people want to step out of it. And by 1963, there were men who thought Bumpy's time had passed. Younger men, hungrier men. Men who looked at the empire Bumpy had built and thought, that should be mine. The air in the Theresa that March afternoon was thick with cigarette smoke and ambition. Men in sharp suits played cards in corners. Women in furs crossed the lobby, their heels clicking like metronomes. The elevator operator called out floors in a voice that had announced them for 30 years. Bumpy sat in his usual spot. High back chair near the window. View of the street. Always the street. A man in his position needed to see who was coming. His bodyguard stood behind him. Had been there for 3 years. Trusted. Loyal, or so everyone thought. The temperature outside was 38 degrees. Inside, the radiators hissed and clanked, pushing heat through the old building. The lobby smelled of wood polish, old leather, and Bumpy's Cuban cigars. Everything seemed normal. Just another day in the kingdom. But in that bodyguard's coat pocket, there was a part in an orchestrated revolver. And in a bank account downtown, there was $50,000. Blood money. Judas money. Someone wanted Bumpy Johnson dead. Not just dead, assassinated by his own man. The ultimate betrayal. The ultimate disrespect. Bumpy sat there reading the Amsterdam news, unaware that behind him, a hand was slowly reaching into a coat, that in exactly 45 seconds, everything would change. That God, fate, or whatever force governs the universe of men like Bumpy Johnson was about to intervene in the most mysterious way possible. The clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m. In the kitchen, someone dropped a tray of dishes. The sound echoed through the lobby like thunder. Bumpy didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. To understand what happened in that lobby, you need to understand what led to it. You need to understand the war that had been building in the shadows of Harlem for months. Bumpy Johnson didn't get to the top by being soft. He got there by being smart, strategic, by knowing that in his world, loyalty was currency and respect was armor. He paid his people well, protected their families, made sure that working for Bumpy Johnson meant something. But the game was changing. The Italians, the Genovese family, they wanted more control. They tolerated Bumpy because he kept Harlem stable. Because a stable Harlem meant steady money from the numbers racket, from the gambling dens, from all the vices that flowed through the neighborhood like a dark river. But tolerance isn't partnership. And by 1963, certain men downtown started thinking, why split the profit when you could take it all? Vincent Gigante. That name mattered. Young, ambitious. Already a made man by 34. He looked at Harlem and saw opportunity. He looked at Bumpy Johnson and saw an obstacle, an old obstacle. The word went out quietly, carefully. Find someone close to Bumpy, someone he trusts. Offer them a fortune, offer them power, offer them whatever it takes. The bodyguard's name was William Hewlett, Billy to his friends. He'd been a boxer before he went to work for Bumpy. Light heavyweight, good hands, better chin. But boxing only pays if you're the champion, and Billy never got that far. So when Bumpy offered him steady work, good money, and respect on the streets, Billy said yes. For 3 years, Billy was loyal. He stood behind Bumpy at meetings, drove him to appointments, slept outside his door when Bumpy stayed at the Theresa. He was family, until he wasn't. The approach came in February, a cold Tuesday night. Billy was at Small's Paradise, having a drink after walking Bumpy home. A man sat down next to him, expensive suit, cologne that cost more than Billy made in a month. The man didn't introduce himself, didn't need to. Billy knew what he was just by looking at him. Italian, connected. "You're Billy Hewlett," the man said. Not a question. Billy said nothing. Took a sip of his whiskey. "You work for Bumpy Johnson." "That's right." The man smiled. "How'd you like to work for yourself?" That's how it starts. Not with threats, with seduction, with the promise that you could be more than muscle, more than the guy standing in the shadow. You could be the guy casting it. The man slid an envelope across the bar. Inside, a photograph of Billy's mother. She lived in a walk-up on 132nd Street. The message was clear. "We know where she lives. We know everything about you." But the man's voice stayed friendly. A $50,000 cash. That's more money than you'll make in 10 years working for Bumpy. All you have to do is one thing, one job, and you're set for life. Billy's hand shook as he picked up his glass. "Think about it," the man said, and walked out into the February cold. For 3 weeks, Billy thought about it. $50,000. He could move his mother out of Harlem, buy a house in Queens, maybe start that gym he'd always talked about. Get out of the life. But to get out, someone had to go in, into the ground, 6 feet under. Quick question. Have you ever had a secret that was eating you alive? A decision you knew was wrong, but the temptation was too strong. Let us know in the comments. Billy took the job, took the money, half up front, half on completion. The gun was provided, a .38 snub nose, untraceable. The instructions were simple. Do it public. Do it in the Theresa. Send a message that no one is untouchable. March 17th was chosen because it was a Sunday. The lobby would be busy. Witnesses. The Italians wanted witnesses. They wanted every gangster, every hustler, every player in Harlem to see that the old guard was finished. Billy barely slept the night before. He held the gun in his hands, checked the chamber. 6 bullets, only needed 1. He prayed, first time in years, asked God to forgive him. Then he put the gun in his coat and went to work. When he met Bumpy that morning, Bumpy smiled at him. "You look tired, Billy." "It didn't sleep good, Mr. Johnson." "Well, take it easy today." "Nothing heavy on the schedule." "Nothing heavy." Billy almost laughed. The weight of that gun in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. They walked to the Theresa together. Bumpy talked about baseball. The Mets were starting their 2nd season. Bumpy loved baseball, talked about maybe going to a game when the weather warmed up. He asked Billy if he wanted to come along. "Sure, Mr. Johnson. I'd like that." Lies. They all lies. They reached the lobby at 3:30. Bumpy took his usual chair. Billy stood behind him, the position he'd stood in 1,000 times before, close enough to protect, close enough to kill. The clock ticked. 3:35. 3:40. 45. Billy's hand moved to his coat. His fingers touched the grip of the gun. It felt cold. Final. 3:47 p.m. Billy Hewlett's heart hammered in his chest so hard he thought Bumpy could hear it. But Bumpy just sat there reading his paper, calm, peaceful, a king in his castle. Billy's hand closed around the .38. In the kitchen, someone dropped that tray of dishes. The crash echoed through the lobby. Several people looked toward the sound, including the elevator operator, including the card players in the corner. Billy saw his moment. While eyes were distracted, while the noise covered the sound of him moving, he pulled the gun from his coat, raised it, aimed at the back of Bumpy Johnson's head. Point-blank range, impossible to miss. This was it. The moment. The betrayal that would echo through history. Billy's finger tightened on the trigger. He pulled. Click. Not the explosion of a gunshot. Not the thunder that would end a legend. Just a hollow, metallic click. Misfire. Billy's eyes went wide. He pulled the trigger again. Click. Again. Click. 3 times. 3 misfires. The gun that had been checked, loaded, verified the night before suddenly refused to fire. Time seemed to stop. The lobby sounds, the conversations, the music from the radio behind the desk, the traffic outside, all of it faded into nothing. There was only that click, that impossible, damning click, and then Bumpy Johnson moved. He didn't spin around fast, didn't leap from his chair. He stood slowly, deliberately, folded his newspaper with care, and turned. His eyes met Billy's. In those eyes, Billy saw his death. Not the quick death of a bullet, the slow death of a man who had betrayed everything. "Billy," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was calm, almost sad. "Put the gun down." Billy's hand shook violently now. He pulled the trigger again. Click. 4 misfires. In a 6-shot revolver. Statistically impossible. I said put it down. Billy's arm dropped. The gun fell from his fingers and clattered on the marble floor. The sound snapped the lobby back to life. People turned slowly. We to the tourist saw the scene, the bodyguard, the gun, Bumpy Johnson standing there like a monument. No one moved. No one breathed. Bumpy walked forward, bent down, picked up the .38. He examined it for a moment, turned it over in his hands. Then he did something that made Billy's blood freeze. He opened the cylinder. 6 bullets, all perfectly seated, all with fresh primer strikes where the firing pin had hit them. But none had fired. Bumpy looked at those bullets for a long time. Then he looked at Billy. "Who?" Bumpy asked. Billy couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. Tears streamed down his face. "Who paid you, Billy?" Vincent voice dropped lower, colder, colder. Who? A gigante," Billy whispered. "The chin. 50,000. They threatened my mother. Bumpy held up his hand. Silence. He walked to the window, looked out at Harlem, his Harlem. The streets he'd protected for 40 years. He stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute. Then he spoke, not to Billy, to the lobby, to everyone watching. "This man," Bumpy said, his voice carrying across the marble and wood, "was offered $50,000 to shoot me in the back. He took the money. He took the gun. He pulled the trigger." Bumpy turned, looked at Billy. But God said no. The words hung in the air like judgment. "I don't pretend to understand the Almighty's plans," Bumpy continued. "I've done things that should have sent me straight to hell. But today, right now, God put his hand on those bullets. And he's telling me something. He's telling all of you something." Bumpy walked back to Billy, stood close enough to touch him. "Wrecker's time. No man dies before his time. No king falls before his kingdom is ready." In Harlem, Bumpy's voice rose. "You ain't ready to let me go." He handed the gun back to Billy. The lobby gasped. Someone whispered, "He's giving it back." "You got 2 more bullets," Bumpy said quietly, so only Billy could hear. "You want to try again? You want to see if God changes his mind?" Billy dropped to his knees. The gun fell again. He sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Please, Mr. Johnson, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Bumpy looked down at him. Get up. Please, I said get up." Billy stood. Barely. His legs threatened to give out. "You go back to whoever paid you," Bumpy said. "You tell them what happened here. You tell them God protects Harlem. You tell them Bumpy Johnson doesn't die until Bumpy Johnson is ready. You understand?" Billy nodded. Now get out of my sight. You got 1 hour to get your mother and get out of New York. I ever see you again, God won't be able to help you." Billy ran, stumbled toward the door, crashed through it into the March cold. The lobby remained frozen, every eye on Bumpy. He walked back to his chair, sat down, picked up his newspaper. "Somebody get me a coffee," he said calmly. "And turn up that radio. I want to hear the game." Just like that, it was over. Life returned to the Theresa, but nothing was the same. Because everyone in that lobby had witnessed something impossible, something divine. They'd witnessed a miracle. The story spread through Harlem like wildfire. By nightfall, every bar, every corner had heard about it. The bodyguard, the $50,000, the gun that wouldn't fire. Bumpy Johnson standing there like Moses parting the Red Sea. But here's what they didn't tell you in the streets. Here's what was kept secret for almost 60 years. That gun was tested 3 days later, not by the police, by someone Bumpy trusted. A weapons expert who'd worked for the military. The man took those 6 bullets, examined them, tested the firing pin, checked the powder. Everything was perfect. Factory fresh ammunition. The gun was cleaned, oiled, in perfect working order. He loaded those same 6 bullets back into the cylinder, aimed at a target, pulled the trigger. Bang, 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 morale, 6 fired perfectly. The expert's report, which surfaced in 2019 from an estate sale of Bumpy's personal effects, stated simply, no mechanical explanation for failure, no defect in ammunition, no defect in firearm. Cause of misfire, unknown. But Bumpy knew, and everyone in that lobby knew. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was divine intervention. The Italians got Billy's message. They got it loud and clear. The word came back through channels. Leave Bumpy Johnson alone. The hit was called off. Not because they were afraid of Bumpy, because they were afraid of what protected him. You don't fight against God. Vincent Gigante, the Chin himself, was heard saying, "That man's got angels watching him. We don't touch him. We wait." And they did wait. They waited until July 7th, 1968, 5 years later, when Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack at Wells Restaurant. Natural causes. God's timeline, not theirs. But here's the deeper secret, the one that didn't come out until Billy Hewlett died in 1994. On his deathbed, Billy confessed to a priest. That confession was sealed. But the priest, Father Thomas Murphy, wrote in his private journal, later donated to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, about a dying man who'd tried to kill a legend. Billy told him everything. The money, the gun, the misfires. But then Billy revealed something else. The night before the attempt, Billy had one moment of clarity. One moment where his conscience screamed at him. He'd taken the gun to St. Martin's Church, sat in the last pew, and prayed. He prayed that if this murder was wrong, if Bumpy Johnson was meant to live, that God would stop it, that he would intervene, that he would save Billy from becoming a killer. Make the gun jam. Billy had prayed. Make it not work. Please, I don't want to do this, but I don't know how to stop. God answered. Father Murphy wrote, "The man wept as he told me. He said he'd been given a miracle and wasted it. He ran that night like Mr. Johnson told him to. Took his mother to Philadelphia. Never came back to New York. Spent 30 years looking over his shoulder. But he said the real punishment wasn't fear of Mr. Johnson. It was knowing he'd tried to kill the one man in Harlem who actually protected people. The one man who deserved loyalty. Billy Hewlett lived with that guilt for 31 years. He drank himself nearly to death. Lost everything. The $50,000. Gone within a year. Gambled away. Drank away. Blood money never spends clean. The gun itself disappeared. Some say Bumpy kept it. Others say he threw it in the Harlem River. But in 2008, a collector claimed to have purchased a .38 revolver from an estate sale with an inscription inside the grip. A God's revolver, March 17, 1963. Whether it's real or not, who can say? But the legend lives. And the message echoed through the underworld for decades. You don't betray Bumpy Johnson. Not because he'll kill you. Voodoo. But because God won't let you. Bumpy Johnson lived 5 more years after that March afternoon. 5 years of power, 5 years of legend, and when he finally died on his feet at a restaurant table, surrounded by friends, the way a king should die. But his legacy wasn't built in those final 5 years. It was built in that single moment, when he stood in the Hotel Theresa lobby and proved that some men are protected by forces greater than guns and money. They wanted to kill him, paid top dollar, used his own man, had the perfect plan. And a higher power said no. That's the story they don't tell you in the history books. They'll tell you about the numbers racket, about his time in Alcatraz, about his wars with Dutch Schultz and his partnership with the Italians. But they won't tell you about the day God stopped a bullet. Because it sounds impossible. It sounds like folklore, like myth. But 40 people saw it happen. 40 witnesses to a miracle. And not one of them, not one ever changed their story. Bumpy Johnson wasn't a saint. He was a criminal, a gangster, a man who did terrible things. But he was also a protector, a man who kept Harlem safe when no one else would, a man who made sure kids could walk to school without getting robbed, a man who made sure elderly women got their groceries carried up 5 flights of stairs. He was complex, human, flawed, and fantastic all at once. And on March 17, 1963, the universe decided he wasn't finished yet. So here's my question for you. Do you believe some people are protected by destiny? Do you believe that when your time isn't up, nothing can touch you? Or was it just luck? Just a faulty gun and a good story? Let me know in the comments, because this story makes you think, makes you wonder, makes you consider that maybe, just maybe, there are forces at work we don't understand. Bumpy Johnson walked out of the Hotel Theresa that day with his head high. He lived 5 more years, built his legend even bigger. And when he finally left this world, Harlem mourned like they'd lost a king, because they had. And unfortunately, they don't make men like Bumpy Johnson anymore.